Welcome everyone to another of our weekly security seminars. And this week I'm really pleased to introduce Carolyn Wong. She's the Chief Strategy Officer at Cobalt. Cobalt is a firm that does pen testing and other security kinds of activities. And she manages several aspects of what Cobalt does. And Chief Strategy Officer, I don't know if that's something you're going to mention. It's a different kind of CSO that some of us may not have encountered. But she brings to that a real wealth of experience with having had director positions at Symantec and working at Cigital, eBay. She's written a book that has gotten some very good reviews. I like it as something that I also refer to. It's entitled Security Metrics, A Beginner's Guide. And she is going to be sharing with us some of her experience in a presentation with a fascinating title, Come for the Mission and Stay for the Culture and Stay for Carolyn's talk. So Carolyn, take it away, please.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. I have a surprise. I told Burke, and I think Mike may have been on the line when I shared the surprise. So here's the thing. SPAF contacted me to join for the seminar series in August of last year. And I was thrilled. And I said, where do I sign up? How do I get involved? And he said, well, we've got this calendar. And I looked, and the next sort of reasonable time was in February, which is today. And so at that time, I thought to myself, well, what should I talk about? I will present my most recent talk, which is Come for the Mission, Stay for the Culture. And as Spaffs was saying, in my role as Chief Strategy Officer, it is a different CSO role. I actually oversee security and IT, as well as human resources, as well as what we call community at Cobalt. So we consider these to all be strategic functions. And Come for the Mission, Stay for the Culture is all about people and culture and security. And here's the thing about that talk. It is recorded. It is online. If you would like to see that talk, you're welcome to Google it and check it out and then talk to me about it after. I would love to talk with you about that talk. But as I was thinking about it for today, I thought to myself, you know what? This talk is, number one, out of date. And number two, it's already available. So if anyone wants to see it, you can. What I'd love to do actually is share with you a brand new talk that I've never shared publicly before. I thought that this might be a group that might find it to be interesting. And certainly I look very forward to questions that arise because of it. Now, it is such a new talk that I don't have a cool title. And so right now we're calling it Security Industry Context. Basically what I'm going to do, I'm going to talk about 5 interwoven themes today. Number 1, modern software and internet security is not a zero-sum game. Number 2, the hardest problems to solve in security are not technical. Number 3, the most powerful solutions that are required to address cybersecurity problems today will require people and process innovation. Number 4, cybersecurity has many different facets, and it can seem complicated, but it is not impossibly complex. There are fundamentals that we as an industry can rely on, and we should not allow ourselves to get too caught up in the myth that these problems are too hard to solve. And theme number 5, protecting the world's digital value is not just something that is the job of security professionals, or frankly, just the job of software developers. Cybersecurity has always been an outcome, a result of the behaviors and interactions and decisions and actions of many different people. This has never been more true than it is today, and I believe that we really are all in this together. My hope is that by presenting these observations to you, that as you go throughout your lives and careers, making decisions and solving problems and making these things happen, that these themes might be something that you can draw upon for inspiration. I do expect, of course, that these themes will continue to evolve. But when I ask myself, why am I in the cybersecurity industry? Why do I stay in the industry? Why do I love this industry? These are actually some of the answers that I have today. So, surprise. Okay, thing number one, it's not a zero-sum game. First and foremost, security is about protecting value. In today's modern world, a lot of the things that we value are shifting from the physical realm to the digital realm. And that's why cybersecurity is so important. Security practitioners used to have this story that they would tell about how to think about cybersecurity. The story says that if Spaff and I are running away from a bear, I don't have to outrun the bear. I just have to run faster than Spaff. In this scenario, the underlying assumption is that I value myself and that I don't value Spaff. My success does not depend on Spaff, and so as long as I get away from the bear, it doesn't matter to me if the bear becomes if Spaff becomes the bear's lunch. The problem with this analogy, of course, is that, well, there's many problems with this analogy. One problem with this analogy is that in reality, software companies and the digital value that is created by organizations, that doesn't happen in a vacuum. We are not independent islands. I actually think that a more appropriate analogy for how things work in cybersecurity would be a three-legged race. Because in a three-legged race, my partner and I are dependent upon each other. And in order to win, we have to work together in lockstep. I really think this is more of how it is today when it comes to software security. Every software company, including the company that I currently work for, is part of a tightly interwoven ecosystem of software companies that provide a variety of products and services. Each of these companies uses their software to help them do so. A perfect example of this dependency between software companies happened to me on Monday, January 4th. That morning, I woke up next to my daughter on the bottom bunk of her bunk bed, and I looked at my phone. My internet is now unstable. Okay, I hope I'm back. If there was any lag, hopefully it wasn't a big deal. I'm back. I'm going to start over for this slide. A perfect example of this dependency between software companies happened on Monday, January 4th. That morning, I woke up next to my 5-year-old daughter on the bottom bunk of her bunk bed, and I looked at my phone. It was my first day back at work after a 2-week vacation, and I had received this text message from my colleague. It turns out that Slack was down. The outage lasted about 6 hours or so, including a significant impact on the precious hours where at my company, we have folks all over the United States. We have a lot of folks in Berlin, Germany, and we have folks all over the world, but mostly it's the US and Germany. And so we have these sort of like precious hours in what is my morning, being on the West Coast, where there's overlap between working hours in San Francisco and Berlin. So this was a startling way to start the first working day of the new year for me. So at the company that I work for, we're about 150 people. We've built a solid business. Today, we serve more than 750 customers, and we use 65 or so vendors. You can think about our software company like a tree. The vendors we rely on are like the roots of the tree, and the customers are like the branches. And of course, if all goes well, those branches will bear fruit year after year. I mentioned waking up in my 5-year-old daughter's bunk bed. I do have 2 young kids, and we watch a lot of Disney movies in our house. As I was thinking about putting this presentation together, I couldn't help but think of this particular song lyric from the Disney movie Pocahontas. And we are all connected to each other in a circle, in a hoop that never ends. Because I think that's how it is today with modern software companies. And that means that security is not something that we can care about in silos. We must acknowledge the dependencies that we have on other software organizations for the state of our security. It is no longer enough to just care about the security of your own, because your vendors' insecurity, your partners' insecurity, these things affect your risk profile and your ability to protect the value that you create. The next theme I want to talk about is the fact that I actually don't believe that the hardest problems to solve in cybersecurity are technical. I am, as you may or may not know, the LinkedIn Learning instructor for the Master the OWASP Top 10 Learning Path. Something about me, before I started creating the content for these instructional videos, I actually didn't have a very deep understanding of what the top 10 was all about. The first version of the OWASP Top 10 came out in 2003, and I started my cybersecurity career in 2005. I became the chief of staff to the global information security team at eBay. And naturally, since eBay is an online marketplace that allows strangers to buy and sell from each other over the internet, web application security was and is of extremely high importance. The problem for me was that every once in a while, I would try to download the OWASP Top 10 document and I would try to read it, but I would get stuck. I would get bored, I would get confused, or something more urgent would come up and I would put it down. So I never really learned the OWASP Top 10 until a few years ago when I had to teach it to other people. The current version of the OWASP Top 10 was released in 2017. And the crazy thing about it is that despite having been through several iterations over the past 17 years, the types of issues found in web applications is pretty much the same. It is the same stuff that the best and the brightest in our industry have been talking about for 17 years. Why haven't these problems been fixed? We know how to find them, we know how to fix them, and we know how to prevent them. So special thanks to Travis McCormick on the Cobalt team for making this happen. Okay, so my internet is unstable again. Okay, hopefully I'm back. I got another thing saying internet is unstable, but that has disappeared. Hopefully I'm back. The next thing I want to talk about is this common misconception that the biggest and the baddest problems, thank you, Spaff, in software security are technical problems. Let's talk about the 2017 Equifax breach. More than 140 million people affected, a widely accepted theory that the attackers were state-sponsored spies from China, a CEO who stepped down 3 weeks after the breach became public, $1.4 billion to clean up the mess, and an FTC settlement. How did this breach happen? It was not because of a super sophisticated zero-day technical issue. It was because some software was found to be vulnerable, a patch was made available, and Equifax did not deploy the patch. This was not a crazy technical problem that lacked a solution. The technical solution was available. This was a lack of people and process innovation. More recently, threat actors managed to plant malware in some monitoring software, which happened to be in use by some 250 or plus organizations, bunches of organizations. When the news first broke, the breach was described as a highly sophisticated, targeted, and manual supply chain attack by an outside nation state. That sounds really intense, and it is, but when you draw back the curtain, it's possible that they had used the password SolarWinds123 to quote unquote protect the company's update server. If this was indeed the case, it's no wonder malicious threat actors took advantage and planted some malware. This is, unfortunately, a simple security misconfiguration. The company I work for, we make this state of pen testing report. In last year's state of pen testing report, my colleague Vanessa Sauter and I reported that misconfiguration was the #1 most commonly identified vulnerability type found across thousands of pen tests done by Cobalt for the 4th year in a row. Theme number 4. Cybersecurity has many different facets and it can seem complicated, but it is not impossibly complex. There are fundamentals that we as industry professionals can rely on, and we should not allow ourselves to get too caught up in the myth that these problems are too hard to solve. In 2005, as a new college grad, I started my first ever full-time job as an information security engineer at eBay. I was handed a 50-page stack of information security policies and told that I was responsible for answering questions about it from technology teams and from the business. It was overwhelming. I thought to myself, how am I ever going to learn all of this stuff? It seems so complex. I found out that after a few months, by meeting with people who had questions about eBay's security policy, writing them down, asking my manager, going back to the person to share with them my newly acquired answer, I found out that people were asking the same questions over and over again. Throughout my career, I've been on 2 security teams as a practitioner. I've led a global product management team. I've done consulting. And at Cobalt, this is my first startup experience. This series of diverse experiences has helped me to see that cybersecurity is really complicated, but it is not impossibly complex. NIST 853 is NIST 853 is nearly 500 pages long. PCI DSS is more than 130 pages long. The BSIM is more than 100 pages long. ASVS is more than 60 pages long. I really think that the fundamental principles of cybersecurity and application security, for that matter, can be boiled down to 4 basic building blocks. A couple of years ago, a few of my colleagues and I worked on a white paper called A Practitioner's Guide to Application Security. It is a 20-page document that outlines how simple, not easy, but simple application security can be. It includes a 1-page poster that we call the Modern Application Security Framework. The framework has just 4 components. Number 1, govern, AKA know your assets. Number 2, find. Number 3, fix. And number 4, prevent. Recently, in cybersecurity land, there has been a lot of emphasis on automation. This storyline says that because we have a lot of cybersecurity problems and we also have a talent shortage, you should try to automate as much as possible so that you are less dependent on people. I happen to strongly disagree that automation can solve all of the world's cybersecurity problems. As my colleague Vanessa Sauter eloquently shared in her B-Sides presentation last year, there are entire classes of security vulnerabilities that can only be discovered by humans. Finding things like race conditions, business logic flaws, and chained exploits cannot be automated. We need things like human creativity, human innovation, human judgment, human opinions, and human decisions to drive the right outcomes in this industry. It is true that software is being developed faster and faster, and some cybersecurity teams are using automation to manage some of the incredible volume of work that they're trying to tackle. However, I think that solving the most important cybersecurity problems must include both automation as well as manual effort. I'm really excited to be at Cobalt because I think that what we're trying to do is change an industry when it comes to innovating on people and on process. Security practitioners need a better model for talent distribution. They need standardized automated workflows that can take the friction out of working cross-functionally between security and engineering teams to find and fix security issues. The next section is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, so I'll just give you a heads up. Consider for a moment the following hypothetical scenario. Imagine that we're in the midst of a global pandemic and a highly infectious, deadly virus is affecting millions of people around the world. It is so bad that in the world's richest country, more than 500,000 people have already died from this disease. If you think it's a technical problem, then you might think the most important thing to do is to develop a vaccine. That is a super hard scientific problem to solve, and it's the scientist's job to figure out. But what happens when an effective vaccine is created? the technical issue has been solved. So does the problem just disappear? Of course not. In some ways, it might actually be easier to invent a completely new vaccine than it is to figure out how to do procurement and distribution and communication and actually get people vaccinated. Just as we know the OWASP top 10, and we've known the most common vulnerabilities in web apps for 20 years. It doesn't mean that we can eliminate and forget about these types of problems. Just because you have a vaccine or 3 doesn't mean that you can vaccinate enough people to eliminate and forget about a global pandemic. So the next section, it's a little bit, it's an analogy. And I have this idea, I have this hypothesis that maybe the information security industry doesn't have a talent shortage. Maybe we have a control and a distribution problem. To illustrate this point, I present the story of Oliver Twist. In this story, 9-year-old Oliver is living in a workhouse where the kids are given 3 meals of thin gruel a day with an onion twice a week and half a roll on Sundays. It is barely enough to survive, but it is certainly not enough to thrive. A well-fed 9-year-old boy might grow strong and capable, and that's not what the workhouse wants and needs. For Bumble, his objective is to keep the kids alive, but still weak and subservient. Take a look at this image. Bumble is standing in front of a huge vat of soup. He controls the ladle, and therefore the boys in the room don't have enough to eat. The problem here is not that there is not enough food to go around. It's a problem of control and of distribution. I want to begin to tie things up. This is turning out to be kind of a short talk, which I think is fine. Hopefully we'll have a bunch to talk about afterwards. I do think we're all in this together. Like I said, cybersecurity is an outcome. It happens as a result of the interactions and the decisions that a lot of different people make. And we can't just be looking out for ourselves and running away from the bear and not caring about our friends who are running with us. And so here is a picture from High School Musical. You know, one of the things that the company that I work for is trying to do, we're a pen test company, we're trying to disrupt old school legacy pen testing, which historically has been pen testing delivered by consulting firms. It's kind of like big projects, custom projects, expensive projects. And what we're trying to do on-demand manual pen testing. I really don't want this to turn into a sales pitch. I really want it to just be about thought leadership. So I'm going to go to my analogy, which says, when I was in college, I took a dance choreography class. I was in a class with perhaps 20 other students, and throughout a semester, I choreographed a dance, and at the end of the semester, we performed it, and it was like 3 minutes long. Now, a very good friend of mine in college played basketball, and we would go to the gym together, and I would go run on the treadmill, and my friend would play basketball. He would just play pickup basketball. And I thought it was so cool that he could just show up, basketball in hand, and just join a game with, 10 people that he'd never met before. And because the rules are defined, they can just play, and they can just play immediately. And I think this type of structured workflow and protocol, where we know how to work together, where the rules are set, where we can just engage on demand immediately and just have fun without having to think about it and plan and plan and plan for a semester before we get to do this thing for 3 minutes together. That's something that I think would be cool. So now I'm gonna do something weird. And I'm gonna, as a closer, I'm gonna read you some lyrics from the movie High School Musical. And then I'd love to ask, hear your questions and comments. Together, 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 everyone. Together, together, come on, let's have some fun. Together, we're there for each other every time. Together, together, come on, let's do this right. Here and now, it's time for celebration. I finally figured it out, that all our dreams have no limitations. That's what it's all about. Everyone is special in their own way. We make each other strong. We're not the same. We're different in a good way. Together's where we belong. And that's that. That's all I've got. What I've got here is my email address. I hope that we'll have some talking here and now. And I encourage folks, I'd love to connect with you afterwards about any of the topics we talked about today, and anything else. So that's all I've got in terms of prepared material.
Okay. So this is an opportunity for you to ask some questions of somebody with experience across a number of companies, but also supervising people who may be out in their first security job. Doesn't have to be first, but it could be one. So what are your questions about what that's like? I know you're out there. I see at least 23 of you in the audience.
Oh, how sweet. So the question says, your passion for the cybersecurity field is extremely clear. What makes you love the field so much? Thank you for that observation. I ended up in cybersecurity not on purpose. I grew up in San Francisco. My parents are Chinese immigrants. And I grew up in the type of house where you do what dad tells you to do. And what my dad told me to do was he told me to study electrical engineering and computer science at the very best school that I could get myself into. And so I went to UC Berkeley and I studied EECS. And afterwards, I looked for a job. Between my junior and senior year, I thought to myself, okay, I need an internship. I applied for like 40 or 50 internships, and the one that ended up working out was at eBay. I took an IT project management role, not a security role. But when I graduated from college, I went back to my internship manager and I said, hey, I've graduated. I'd love to work on this team full time. And he said, we'd love to have you, but there's a hiring freeze in IT. We can't hire you right now. But you should know that there are a couple of entry-level positions over on the information security team. And that was, whatever it is, 16 years ago. So the rest is kind of history. Why do I love this field? I love the field because of the people in the field. I get to meet and interact with and work with some of the most interesting, smart people that I've ever known. And I just love that. I also like solving interesting and hard problems. And I think there's no shortage of those. So yeah, thank you so much for the kind question. I actually host a podcast called Humans of InfoSec that might be particularly interesting for a lot of the folks here. What I do on that podcast, Spaff, we got to have you on the podcast, is I talk to people about their work and their career. And I like to ask people about sort of their career stories. How did they get from wherever they started to where they are today? One of the underlying themes of that podcast, a couple of the underlying themes, one thing is that everyone's story is totally different for the most part. And another one is that everyone started not knowing anything at one point in time. Everyone at one point in time didn't know anything about cybersecurity, even the very top experts in the field. So if you're interested, check it out, Humans of InfoSec. Yes. There's another question from Burke. There's a school of thought that artificial intelligence-based products will replace a large number of security professionals. You mentioned that you believe it is a mix between tools and people can't be replaced completely. But do you believe that tools and automated solutions will eventually grow to be more prevalent than actual human professionals? So this is a super interesting question. I think that they're just needed for different things. Even fancy AI and ML on some level is following instructions in code that a human told it to do at one point in time. We've got bunches of data and we have historical information, and we can put all that information into a machine and it can spit something out. I think that I've learned about this concept called, oh gosh, something drift, pattern drift, data drift. I can look it up after. There's some sort of drift concept. And the idea simply is that whatever data set you're working with, it's sort of never going to match exactly the current situation that you have. And so whatever it spits out as a result is never going to be exactly right. I think that machines are super good at doing things like that are well-defined, that are repeatable. And there's lots of that kind of stuff in InfoSec. But there's also a lot of, there's also still going to be a human touch that's needed. I recently commented in an article where someone was writing about the recent Clubhouse attacks, breach, if you will. And based on the little that I know about it, my interpretation was that the attacker had used a business logic attack to, I think, like listen into a Clubhouse chat and then like publish it or something like that. Now, a business logic attack is not something, to my knowledge, that today we have software and machines to help us find. We actually need people to say, maybe we should conduct a threat model. That's a human manual activity. That's not a scanner. You know, that's not a configuration assessment tool. Maybe we should consider misuse and abuse cases. You know, here's like the good path for the way we want and think these features are going to use, you know, but how might someone malicious twist it and use it for different purposes? So I think it's a super interesting question, and would love to talk on it further. Thank you for the question, Burke. There's one that says, there's a couple about OWASP actually. One person asks, can you elaborate on what OWASP is? Excellent question. OWASP stands for Open Web Application Security Project. It's basically like a do-gooder nonprofit of people who like want to make application security and software security better for the world. They have conferences, they have white papers, they have tools, they do all sorts of cool things. The OWASP Top 10 is one of their more popular, more known projects. And the intent simply was to say, hey, let's make a list of common web application security vulnerabilities and then share that information with the world. It's really intended as an awareness initiative. And there's another question about OWASP Top 10. Have you considered the relative nature of OWASP Top 10, and that keeping the same relative order in no way expresses absolute values? It shows us that the relative order has not changed significantly, but of course that is to be expected as we use the same fundamental technologies. So I'm not sure I totally understand the question, but I'm going to interpret it and in my own words, and then perhaps you can tell me if I'm interpreting this correctly. So what I'm understanding is, hey, Caroline, we've got a WASP Top 10. There's an order. You know, I'm not sure, honestly, if the idea is that like number 10 is like the 10th most common, number 1 is the first most common. As far as I'm concerned, it's like, here's 10, they're common. That being said, certainly problems like access control, sensitive data exposure, you know, one could say that these are like sufficiently generic, sufficiently broad that maybe yesterday it was applicable in technology A. And today, maybe we've moved away from technology A and figured it out, but now we see a similar problem happening in technology B. So Krasimir, perhaps, I don't know if that's useful or not. I welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Okay, cool. So, hey, thank you for the presentation. So let me clarify. Let's assume that number 11 is alien invasion. Assuming, right?
Sure.
So, and make a little bit of logic experiment. So no matter how much we improve cross-site scripting or we improve, for example, buffer overflows and so on, they at some point maybe will drop to number 11 and alien invasion will become number 10 on number 9. Well, the problem then is that we're going to spend time dealing with alien invasion, which is going to make it less of a problem, which is going to make it drop down again, which is going to let this thing come back in the top again. So basically, if we were, let's say, if injection was at value 5 and we were defending at value 4, we had one delta 1, which means that, yeah, we were failing at that. And this is why it was like a problem. We may increase our defenses from 4 to 8, but then at the same time, we're going to be increasing defenses across the entire spectrum because we're dealing with always the weakest things and we put more pressure there. But then the attackers and the attacks will also increase. And maybe when we're at defense 8, we're going to have attackers that are going to beat us with skill level 8.1, which is actually 0.1 difference, but still relatively compared to the other differences, it will still end up there. So I don't think that that looking retrospectively at OWASP, first OWASP is highly subjective for one, but then just looking at the difference over years does not really give us any information for what is included there. At best, we can get information, oh, we're seeing a little bit more SQL now, or we're seeing a little bit less SQL injection. But then we can say, well, maybe we're seeing less SQL injection, not because we solved the problem, but because now people are using mostly no SQL, which then leads us also to base rate of attacks. So that's, another can of worms, but that's what I wanted to say about the absolute level versus a relative level. We really can't use that to make that judgment.
So Krasimir, I really like the way that you're thinking, and I have a few thoughts in response. Thought number one, I think you're absolutely correct that the OWASP top 10 is very subjective. And so I think with something as subjective and as imprecise and as inaccurate as the OWASP top 10, it might not be relevant to say, well, we're doing such a good job fighting number one that, number two goes to the back of the line. I kind of don't think it's a precise or an accurate enough model to assume those sort of things. I think it's much cloudier than that.
That was my point. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So good. So then let me say this, Krasimir, and I am like not really a car person. Y'all are in Indiana, so I think there's like this big car culture. My husband grew up in Indiana. My mother-in-law and my father-in-law are both graduates of Purdue University. Anyway, my expectation is that if I looked up the statistics from like when people in the United States switched from using horses to using cars, and then if I look at when seatbelts were made and when they were required by law, my expectation is that probably when cars first came out and they didn't have seatbelts, maybe more people died in car accidents. Maybe when seatbelts came and then they were required by law, maybe fewer people died in car accidents. And this is what I think I don't really see when I look at something like the OWASP top 10. I wonder if that makes any sense.
Oh, no, it does make sense. The point there is that OWASP top 10 is actually a qualitative relative ordering of things versus absolute. So you cannot really apply it this way.
That is true.
Another example. If we started looking at particular type of SQL injection, not SQL injection, let's say buffer, let's start talking about if we break down the buffer overflows that, for example, would lead to a stack overrun, which is going to cost something. Now, 20 years ago, that was a problem. Now, stack canaries are pretty much standard for any compiler you can think of. So if we go to that granularity level, we're actually not going to see it. And we're going to say, yes, we solved that problem. But other problems of that class came out. And since we have them lumped in this big thing, we kind of may think that things have not been resolved, but we're actually making quite a lot of progress. So I personally think it's important for us to also acknowledge the progress we have. I have heard a lot of bashing on security from folks saying, oh yeah, we're kind of going in circles. No, we're not going in circles. We're going fairly fast, but the technology we're trying to secure is going just as fast, if not even faster in some cases. Thus, we're having those security gaps. And also, if you have noticed, when the security gaps become too big, technology is forced to stop, because then the operations teams actually slow down in their deployments, focus on more patching when they see that they have too many security issues. And then when they feel confident again that they're not hacked, then they start rushing again. And then the security team starts chasing them, and then they slow down again. So I think this is normal progression.
Yes, I totally agree. I think it's absolutely an evolution. You know, in my yard, I have a fence, and the deer jump over the fence. And so I build a higher fence, and then maybe the deer jump higher, right? So I do think there is kind of this like progressive evolutionary thing. I also, while I think that there are themes in the cybersecurity industry that have stayed consistent over decades, I'm not at all here to sort of bash the state of the industry or say that, you know, the efforts of the professionals have not gone anywhere. In my case, actually, the point I'm trying to make is that I think that while solving technical problems in security is very hard and should be very respected, I actually think that people and process problems matter just as much. And I think there is less of a spotlight, because sometimes it's a little less sexy to say, hey, why don't you round up all your engineering leaders and convince them to patch their systems? You know, that's kind of not as exciting as like, oh my gosh, this 0 day, it's crazy, you know? And so I think that that's a little bit of one of the points that I'm trying to make.
You have another Q&A that you haven't answered yet, Carolyn, if you could do you see it?
So what's a way to keep up with all found security vulnerabilities? Is there a good way to stay alert? So actually, like all these RSS feeds you can subscribe to. I think that it depends, right? There's CVS, or you can say like, what are the new vulnerabilities coming out? I want to know about them. If you're less interested about it, then at that like sort of specific technical granular level, there's a lot of other podcasts, not my podcast, but oh, here's my internet again. Okay. Hopefully I'm back. I got a little, your internet sucks.
Breaking up a little bit, but we still see you.
Okay, good. Thank you. So there are, there's blogs, there's podcasts. I actually really like a guy named Daniel Miessler. He has both a podcast as well as a blog called Unsupervised Learning. And while it's not only about technical security vulnerabilities, I think that Daniel's podcast and his newsletter have a really good, that's what I use to keep up to date with industry happenings. I see another one actually from Michael in the chat. Does the industry really want us to solve the issue? If boards and C-levels think that solutions are complicated and complex rather than fundamental, doesn't that benefit organizations such as Cobalt? What a fun and a funny question. I think that in my experience interacting with boards, I think boards just want to solve problems. I don't know that they're enamored with complex and complicated things. I actually think that when I speak with colleagues of mine who are, for example, chief information security officers presenting to the board, one of the challenges that I think some CISOs have is, how do I communicate all of this stuff to the board in a way that is going to be well received and understood, and ultimately maybe going to persuade this board to support my recommended plan of action. So I actually think that convincing someone to give you money often involves convincing that person that the problem is solvable and that you can have a plan that will actually work. I think that some CISOs struggle with communicating to the board because if the board doesn't understand what a CISO is trying to communicate, I think they're unlikely to give money over budget and headcount to something that they don't understand, especially when it's compared against something that they might understand much more clearly. Things like marketing or sales or engineering dollars. I think I guess the timing's kind of good. We've got like 3 minutes left. Spaff, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you so much to everyone who asked questions. And I'm very serious about staying in touch. If anyone wants to email me, connect with me on LinkedIn, continue any of this conversation, I'd love to.
Well, we're really glad you were able to spend some time with us today. And next time you're in the area, let us know. Informally
I
or
most certainly
formally,
will.
love to have you come visit.
Will.
Thank you
Wonderful.
very much.
Thanks so much.